This is Private Werner Goldberg. In 1939, a Berlin newspaper labeled him as the ideal German soldier. His picture was used on a recruiting poster for the Wehrmacht, Hitler's army. He served in the German army until 1940. He was dismissed because of his last name, Goldberg. Werner Goldberg, the ideal German soldier, was a Jew.
Goldberg, your name? You are Aryan? I don't know what it is. I said, I tell you, stand up. You are not Aryan. Like, I must ask my father.
What follows is a very strange story about men who, despite their Jewish ancestry, were drafted into the same Nazi army that was out to destroy their Jewish relatives. The Nazis called these men Mischlinge.
I didn't want to join the Wehrmacht. I had to go to the Wehrmacht.
Ich habe auch Twillen gelegt. Twillen habe ich auch gelegt. Hier rum, hier.
אני גם בוגר ישיבה, וכמובן שמה שחשבתי בעצמי, כל זה מה שהיה צריך שאולי אבא שלי, אמא שלי, מישהו מהמשפחה שלי יראה אותי, הנה הבן שלנו חייל גרמני עם הצלב קרס.
This much I know for sure. I was proud being a soldier of part Jewish descent to become a German officer. Yes, I had aspired that.
Since the Middle Ages, Jews like Moses Mendelssohn, Heinrich Heine, and Albert Einstein have made significant contributions to German culture. Jews were proud Germans and served with distinction in the German armies. The rise of the Nazis in 1933 and Hitler's consolidation of power brought deep and ultimately destructive changes to Germany. Life began to change radically for the 500,000 German Jews and their part Jewish children and relatives. All around them, the Nazi racial policies were put into practice. Jewish shops were boycotted. Jews were forced out of their professions. Life became more and more dangerous for Jews in Germany. The Nazis put the infamous 1935 Nuremberg laws into practice. These laws changed the citizenship rights of the Jews, but who was a Jew according to the 1935 Nuremberg laws? A person with 2 Jewish parents was considered a full Jew and was not drafted into the army. Full Jews in the army were summarily dismissed. Mischling was a derogatory German term for those of mixed blood. Mischling were drafted into the army. A half-Jew with a Jewish mother or father was drafted. Quarter Jews and eighth Jews were also drafted.
חוקי נירנברג עסקו בשני דברים. אחד זה החוק מה שנקרא החוק להגנה על הדם והכבוד הגרמני, שקבע שהיהודים אינם שייכים לאומה הגרמנית. והשני זה חוק האזרחות, שקבע שהיהודים אינם אזרחי גרמניה, אלא הם מה שנקרא נתינים של המדינה הגרמנית. ואחרי שהגדירו מי איננו גרמני, עכשיו צריך להגדיר מי הוא בעצם יהודי, ובזה הם הסתבכו. כמובן שהם גויסו לצבא.
American history professor Bryan Rigg researched the issue and wrote a book on the subject.
The term Mischlinge was used for mutts, dogs, crossbreeds and so on. It's a horrible term. And really with the Nazi, takeover of power in 1933 and then with the Nuremberg laws in 1935, was this term readily used for people.
Some of these offspring of mixed marriages identified with the Nazi-ruled government. They served in every branch, were of nearly every rank. Some stayed in the army for the security it offered. A very few were like Air Force General Erhard Milch, who was assistant to Nazi Field Marshal Hermann Göring.
He knew about slave labor going to Auschwitz. He knew about experiments going on in Dachau. And he was a really nasty individual. He was a Nazi party member and so on. But he's a small minority of most of these people.
Only a very few of the part Jewish officers were like Milch. Major Ernst Bloch received a shocking assignment to rescue the 6th Lubavitch Rebbe from Poland's Warsaw Ghetto.
Now when Bloch gets up there, and he's going up to ultra-Hasidic Lubavitcher Jews, and he's asking them, hey, where's the Rebbe? We want to rescue him. And the Lubavitchers are like, yeah, sure you do, and we want to join the German army. But eventually, Bloch gets them to agree to this. They, of course, believe he's an angel in human form. He looked over to Rebbe Schneers and he says, don't worry about it, I'm half Jewish, I'm here to protect you. You know, Meshuggah. The next day, he escorted them to the border of Lithuania, then he bid them farewell, and then Rebbe Schneerson went up to Riga, and then he was waiting there for his visa from the United States.
Not all the part Jewish soldiers were of high rank. Some were simple soldiers who served in all aspects of the armed forces.
And within the context of the military, I conservatively estimate that 60,000 half-Jews and 90,000 quarter-Jews served in the German armed forces during World War II. And these people were in no man's land in many ways. Well, one way was, okay, yeah, they're not full Jews, they're not going to be persecuted 100%, but also they're not Aryan, so they're going to be treated as 100% German citizens.
The Nazi rule brought with it many odious surprises. Imagine what it was like for a boy who thought he was immune from the Nazi horrors to one day find out that according to the Nazis, he was in fact a Jew. Werner Goldberg was brought up Lutheran. He didn't discover his father was Jewish until the headmaster, Nazi party member, came into his Berlin classroom to separate the Jews from the Aryan.
I got home and asked my father what is Aryan and what is not Aryan and so. And he told me, yes, our family is a Jewish family. I said, you are not Jewish. No, I am a Christian. And I got Christian 1902. But we never talked about this. We talked about Jewish history. We talked about the Old Testament. That was for both the same. But we never told about race. What race? That was all German.
Young Werner Goldberg didn't want to join the Hitler Youth because he'd have to wear a cap with a swastika.
I was in the Boy Scout organization. And in there, the Hitler Jugend, they asked me if I would take the swastika. And I said I didn't want this. And so they told me I should go out.
Adolf Hitler, der Führer der deutschen Jugend, hat das Wort.
Not all boys were surprised to find they were Jewish. Helmut Kopp knew his mother was Jewish. Kopp's Jewish mother died when he was an infant. Because of complicated family matters, he was placed in Berlin's Ahava Jewish orphanage. He was circumcised when he was 12 years old.
Und da muss ich sagen, da war ich ein Kind und ausgerechnet noch ein orthodoxes Heim. Ja? Da wurden sämtliche Feiertage gehalten. Da wurde zum Beispiel das Geschirr gekaschert. Ja? Das Geschirr gekaschert, wenn mal ein Teller von milchig auf fleischig gestellt wurde, dann war es schon nicht richtig. Ich hatte eine Bar Mitzwa im jüdischen Kinderheim. Ich habe auch Twillen gelegt. Twillen habe ich auch gelegt. Hier rum.
האמא התחתנה לו עם גרמני, היא הייתה יהודייה אמא והוא נוצרי. ואני לא יודע אם באיזה צורה הם חיו, כן? אבל היא נשארה יהודייה. אבל זה לא היה גם משהו יוצא דופן. ברור שהוא לא היה יהודי במובן גרמני, בגרמניה. לפי ההלכה הוא היה יהודי. כשבאנו לארץ ב-34, אבא שלי דאג שההורים של אמא שלי, אחות של אמא של הלמוט, יעברו לארץ. שלח להם אפידייוויט כלפי השלטון הבריטי פה, והם עלו ארצה.
Und mich konnten sie ja nicht nehmen, weil ich hieß ja Kopp. Und die Nazis haben ja ganz große Unterschiede gemacht, Man konnte nicht einfach einen 14-jährigen Jungen nehmen und nach Palästina gehen. Nicht? Das ging nicht.
רצו שהוא יעלה לארץ, היות והוא לא היה נימול, ארגנו, זאת אומרת עשו לו ברית, הוא היה לו קשר בגיל 14-15 עם ההיטלר יוגנד כנראה בתור חברים, ככה כמו בבית ספר, היה מובן מאליו שהוא היה. חוץ מזה אני אומר תמיד, מה שהוא התנהג בתור ילד זה משהו אחר, יש לנו אותה סבתא, והוא זה, והוא בן דוד, וזה כמו, לא להגיד אח, אבל זה בן דוד, כן? ואני, אם היה לי שמץ של ספק שהוא יכול היה לעשות משהו, זה, לא הייתי מדבר איתו.
Helmut Kopp left the Jewish orphanage and eventually was drafted into the army.
Und da Mischlinge ersten Grades auch eingezogen wurden, also habe ich da schon bei der Musterung auch wieder die Erklärung, eidesstattliche Erklärung, ob ich arisch oder jüdisch bin. Und da habe ich 2 Elternteile auch angekreuzt als arisch. Ich bin als Arier reingegangen, weil ich ja arisch unterschrieben habe, die Erklärung. Ja, und da habe ich mir, vorher habe ich mir das alles schon ausgedacht. Wie ich eingezogen wurde am 2.12. und dann standen wir wieder alle nackend vor der Untersuchungskommission und dann haben sie gesagt, was haben Sie da? Und da haben die anderen Kameraden, mit 7 standen wir in einer Reihe und da haben die gesagt, ja, der Kopf, der hat einen Judenpimmel. Und da sah ich nein und da waren Uniformierte alle, Oberst. Und ich sah nein, ich hatte eine Phimose und Sie können noch sehen, ich habe 3 Nähte. Und wann war das mit der Phimose, haben Sie gefragt? Ich sage, ja, da war ich 12 Jahre alt. Machten sie so und dann war gut. Und dann ist ein Arzt rangekommen, hat sich dann Gummihandschuh übergezogen und dann hat er gedreht, mein Glied hin und her. Und dann hat er gesagt, ja, das kann Phimose sein.
Why we don't see these people being sent off straight to the camps was really a political decision. Hitler and the Nazis did not want to persecute them too much because they knew they would ostracize Aryan relatives who were in the economy, business, government, and in the military.
Hans-Gerd Falkenberg knew that his mother was Jewish and had converted to Christianity.
My mother's side was Jewish, and there were very, very big tensions with her mother. It was a very strange fact that I never, together with my grandmother, went to the Stettin synagogue because my mother had forbidden it more or less. Me and my grandmother went to the Jewish cemetery and I could see the stones with a strange Hebrew scripture. Then I saw my past is in a way different from the past of others of my same age. I had a strange biology teacher, I still remember his name, Tobias, who told Aryans are the leading race and Mischlings are weaklings. I thought, I have to prove the contrary. This consciousness, I will prove as far as I can with my physical ability to tell this is all nonsense, what you talk about superiority.
Falkenberg's Jewish mother fled to England with her husband and daughter. Falkenberg decided to stay in Germany because of the promise of a university scholarship. But instead, he found himself drafted into the German army.
I didn't want to join the Wehrmacht. I had to go to the Wehrmacht. Something has forgotten, as far as I know, to lead in a paragraph, Mischlinge should not go to the Wehrmacht. So every German Mischling had to go, had to be a soldier. There were units just around the border to Poland, so we were the next really to march into Poland.
In September 1939, Hitler ignored his agreements with Britain and invaded Poland. 2 days later, the British declared war. Germany's full Jews were exempt from the draft, but not the half-Jews. In his speech before the Reichstag in 1939, Hitler declared he would exterminate all Jews. It was during this period, in about 1939, that a picture was taken of Werner Goldberg in uniform and used on a recruitment poster.
I thought it is impossible that this photograph gave this paper or my photo to the paper. But what should I do? Let him have that money.
Hans-Gert Falkenberg found himself stationed in the same city where his beloved Jewish grandmother was living in a Jewish senior citizen's home. Falkenberg, in his German army uniform, would sneak out to meet her in a forest, and they'd walk hand in hand, he in his German uniform, and she in her coat with the yellow Jewish star.
We would meet once a week. She had her star already, but we would meet at the end of the streetcar station and walk in the forest. And that was quite painful. It was quite clear that I would not go in my uniform to the Jewish old age pension and take her up, but that we would meet somewhere outside, not to be observed or so. I just thought if we are for ourselves for a time, not seen by others or so, or not even asked by unknown people, what does a soldier there, somebody with a yellow star, yeah. She was much more important than the star.
Instead of wearing the German uniform, did it occur to Falkenberg to slip away from the army?
I had no connections, never, to any enemies, to any group of resistance or so. Once I tried even, very late, to escape to Switzerland. And I constructed it very carefully. And after 6 weeks of learning really to ski and all that, I first found out that it is very, very risky. And second, that there's even a chance that the Swiss sent me back to Germany. Europe was fascistic. Even Switzerland was in some way fascistic.
אני לא הייתי חושב לתת למישהו עצה בזמן הנאצים לברוח מהצבא, ולאן הוא יברח? לאן שהוא יבוא, יתפסו אותו. פה אתה יכול לברוח מהצבא, שם אתה לא יכול.
This is a photograph of Arno Spitz, taken with his family in their backyard in Berlin. He is wearing a paratroop uniform with 3 Iron Cross medals for bravery. Arno Spitz was raised in a privileged environment. His grandfather was a successful businessman. Arno Spitz's father grew up in a comfortable upper-middle-class Jewish family that had converted to Christianity. Spitz's father cared little for religion and married a non-Jewish German woman. By 1937, Spitz's father had fled Nazi Germany for the United States.
My father was not brought up in the Jewish faith at all, but of course he had been, most, not all, of his friends were Jewish. And my father left after takeover of Hitler.
Den Verrat gerade am Erdnachmittag auf einer Ebene in euch marschieren sehen.
Arno Spitz was sent with his unit to the front lines in Denmark. He was never asked if he was part Jewish.
And it might have been that just at that time there were some inquiries about the ancestry of soldiers, and that nobody cared about that issue. Nobody ever came of the idea that I could have a Jewish ancestry. I did not look at it at all.
During his army service, Arno Spitz was decorated 3 times with the Iron Cross for bravery.
At that time was my first combat. I was in a very extreme situation there with a paratroop battalion, and I was shown by my captain the bunker that I was supposed to take together with 10, 12 or so other soldiers. And on a very little elevation, there were the Russian bunkers built. And while I was moving ahead on my head and my knees, those bullets of these 2-centimeter guns behind me always flew above my head. So I could not raise my head at all because it would have been shorn off immediately. And then I rose up and took my machine pistol and wanted to break into the bunker. But then I noticed there were 2 Russian soldiers lying dead right on the right side of that bunker. So I sprayed them with my guns in order to make sure whether they were dead or not. But they were dead. I'm glad they were dead. And went into that bunker, and the bunker was empty. It was such a undramatic. There was the village. We couldn't see any Russians right at the border of that village. We were about 100 meters or so from the border of that village. We went back into that village, and at the beginning of a street, this orderly set up his machine gun and shot along the road of that village. And we had counterfire, and after a short time, the orderly was dead. The battalion commander decorated me right away with the Iron Cross. But, this Iron Cross meant a lot to me. Probably at that time, I might have recalled for myself that I was part Jewish, and I said, well, Jewish people are often claimed to be cowards, and even my mother, who was very pro-Semitic, my mother was very pro-Semitic, but even she told me once, Jewish people are cowards. And I thought of that at that moment. I said, this I recall quite well. That said, you see, I'm not a coward.
Historians believe that as many as 20 men who served in the German army during World War II eventually immigrated to Israel. Some fought for the foundation of the Jewish state. Ephraim Glazer was born Jewish in Hungary and today lives in Haifa, Israel. During the Second World War, Glazer was captured by the Nazis and escaped. He lived in the forest and soon found himself starving. He approached a German army base to beg for food, claiming he was Aryan.
בשפת עמודי יש מאיגרא רמה לבירה המקטש, אתה נופל מהר גבוה לתוך בור, אצלי אני אומר להפך, אני יוצא מתוך בור להר גבוה. אני יצאתי מתוך מחנה הונגרי, מחנה עבודה, במצב נוראי של מכות ועינויים וכל מיני צרות צרורות. פתאום אני מגיע למקום, וצריך להבין את זה מבחיננו, שפתאום אני מגיע למקום שמכבדים אותי. הגרמנים הסתכלו עליי בכבוד. טוב, זה הכל היה מקרי, באמת מקרי של מקרי, והגעתי לצבא גרמני בגלל רעב. ומגלל הרעות שלי, של ארי, אני יכולתי להסתדר די יפה בין הגויים בתור לא יהודי, בתור אחד שהוא נראה כמו לא יהודי. וכך אני הצלחתי להסתובב איזה שבועיים בערך. שבועיים זה מה שהיה, בלי שום תעודות, בלי שום קשר, באופן לגמרי במחתרתי.
Glaser reached a German supply base, knocked on the door, and met a very friendly German officer.
עד היום זה נשאר בעיניי חידה, למה ואיך האיש הזה הלך ועזר לנו בכל מיני מקרים קשים. יש לי הצעה בשבילך, אולי אתה מוכן להצטרף ליחידה שלנו בתור מתרגם להונגרית וגרמנית וכל, פה אנחנו זקוקים למתרגם.
Glaser agreed to the offer.
למה להצטרף? כי זה היה הדרך היחידי שאני אוכל להגיע עד לגבול ואוכל ליפול בידי הרוסים.
The Russian border was far away, and suddenly Glaser discovered he had dangerously incriminating evidence with him.
והיה לי איזשהו תרמיל גב מאוד מרופד, וקיבלתי תרמיל גב גרמני, והתחלתי להוציא את החפצים שלי, ופתאום אני מגלה שיש לי כמה דברים מאוד מאוד מסוכנים וחשודים בעיני לא יהודי, וזה היה כמה תמונות של אבא שלי עם זקן ופיות, ואימא שלי והמשפחתי, ושני האחים מפלסטינה, מארץ ישראל, ששלחו לנו תמונות, ומאחור הייתה הקדשה בעברית. ואחר כך הגעתי, ראיתי שיש לי עוד משהו, שבזמנו דרשו ההונגרים לתת להם את התפילין שלנו, אבל אני בגניבה השארתי לעצמי את שקית התפילין שבאה מארץ ישראל, שמזכרת ירושלים, עם הכותל המערבי, תפור יפה, ואני רואה שאני מעביר את החפצים שלי, ואני מוצא את הדברים האלה. מה אני אעשה? משום מה, אני לא יכול להסביר, החלטתי שאני את התמונות האלה לא זורק, אני עוטף אותם בנייר ומכניס אותם בכיס שלי, של המדים, מתחת צלב הקרס של המדים הגרמנים, שם הכנסתי את התמונות. ואילו את השקית תפילין, עטפתי אותו באיזושהי חולצה, והכנסתי אותו בתרמיל גב הגרמני.
Hans-Gerd Falkenberg's godmother was a Nazi party member. Even so, she was shocked to hear that Falkenberg's Jewish grandmother had been deported to a concentration camp in Poland.
And she asked, just by the way, what about Ömchen, my grandmother? And I said, didn't you hear about it? And she said, no, what? She has been transported to Poland 3 weeks ago with all Jews still staying in Stettin to the east. And she said, this is horrible. Why didn't you tell me? Something has to be done with it. And I said, you are a member of the party, you are a Nazi. Yes. I still believe that the Jews are unhappy for Germany, but that has nothing to do with your grandmother.
In 1940, the Nazi government plugged the loophole in their draft laws and the paradox of having Jews serving in the German army. Any half-Jew serving in the army at that time was to be demobilized. The half-Jews who were freed could no longer enjoy the safety of being in the army and now found themselves at the mercy of the Gestapo. But the army was a place where soldiers were usually accepted if they did their jobs, and not too many questions were asked, no matter what the Nazi regulations. Werner Goldberg was offered the chance to stay in the army.
Yes, but you may stay if you want. And I said, well, my father told me, if everyone not want you, stay not. And so I hear of my father's voice and went.
The Gestapo came to the units to check if any Mischling were still in the ranks. Falkenberg's commanding officer gave him a chance to avoid discovery.
I have to make a proposal. If I send you tonight to the front, so you have a chance to stay longer with the army. You know, this is one of the people. Nobody had asked him or so. He did it out of his own. I said, certainly, yes, thank you. And I immediately went away the same night to Denmark. That saved more than a year for me as a soldier for the German army. And all my school comrades, who in the meantime were lieutenants or over-lieutenants, told Gerd, stay with the Wehrmacht, stay with the army. That is the safest place in Germany.
Was Helmut Kopp frightened he'd be discovered as a Jew when he was in the army?
Jeden Tag. Jeden Tag hatte ich Angst gehabt.
Private Kopp declined his commanding officer's offer to promote him to sergeant, fearing his Jewish background would be discovered.
Und später hatte ein Kompanieführer war ein Leutnant, der hat gesagt, Kopp, du hast das gute Zeug für einen Kriegsdienstoffizier. Willst du dich nicht melden? Nein, habe ich gesagt. Konnte ich nicht. Denn in dem Moment, wenn zum Beispiel bis Obergefreiter geht es noch oder bis Unteroffizier, aber dann gucken sie die Papiere nach und dann wird es knifflig.
The war was at its peak, but for men like Helmut Kopp, who were living a lie under the noses of the Germans, the future looked bleak. He was a tank driver on the dangerous Russian front.
Vom Arbeitsdienst direkt zur Armee, also zur deutschen Wehrmacht. Und da ich mich gemeldet hatte zum Panzerfahrer, kam ich auch zu dieser Truppe. Und bei der Truppe war ich später bei der 257. Panzerjägerabteilung und eingesetzt wurden wir dann vor Charkow, kamen wir. Und Charkow war dreimal haben wir es genommen, dreimal haben wir es verloren. Und da hatten wir schwere Verluste gehabt, also über die Hälfte unserer Einheit.
At the High Mountain Combat School in Mittenwald, I was promoted to a lieutenant. I think I was proud. And then proud to even, this much I know for sure. I was proud being a soldier of part Jewish descent to become a German officer. Yes. Yes, I had aspired that. Well, we did not think that Hitler, as a Nazi man, being at the same time the highest commander of the army, to us, there was always a split between traditional German army and political institutions. There was a difference between army service and Hitler service.
Did Kopp think that as a part Jew, his life was in danger?
Ja, ist nur zum Überleben, habe ich unterschrieben, ich habe mir das überlegt. Insofern, entweder stellen Sie mich an die Wand oder ins KZ.
אני הייתי עושה במקום אותו דבר, זה פחד לעשות את זה, לגלות שהוא יהודי. ודיברתי עם הרבה גרמנים, זה מה שהרבה אנשים לא מבינים גם בארץ, שרוב הגרמנים היו בזמנו בצבא. אלה שעשו את הצבא, זה היה חלק קטן מאוד מהגרמנים. ויש כאלה שאמרו שאני הייתי פעם נאצי שרוף, אני שיניתי דעה שלי, אני מאמין לו ב100%. חלק אומר, אני אף פעם לא הייתי נאצי, כן? אבל אם מישהו אומר לי שהוא היה נאצי שרוף ושינה את הדעה שלו, אני מאמין לו.
אי אפשר לדעת מי היה נאצי. היו כאלה שהאמינו בדוקטרינה הנאצית, והמוצא היהודי שלהם לא הפריע להם. והיו כאלה שהיו חיילים שרתו משום שזו הייתה חובתו של אזרח, מבלי שתהיה לו זיקה חיובית כלפי האידיאולוגיה הנאצית. זה כל מקרה כאן הוא אינדיבידואלי לגמרי.
Helmut Schmidt was a Mischling of the second degree and became Chancellor of Germany in 1970.
והסבא שלו היה ממוצא יהודי, והלמוט שמיט שרת בצבא הגרמני, היה באיזו יחידה של נ"מ, ואף פעם המוטיב הזה לא הפריע לו.
One of the most glaring examples was Erhard Milch, who was in charge of all the logistics for the German Air Force. Historians claim that Milch's father was Jewish, but that his mother lied and claimed the man who fathered her 6 children was an Aryan. This lie helped Milch become one of the most powerful men in Germany. He also helped found Lufthansa Airlines. Hitler later declared Milch a full German Aryan and provided him an official certificate of Aryanization.
תיאורטית, יהודי זה קונסטרוקציה גזעית או מבוססת על עקרונות של גזע. למעשה, זו קונסטרוקציה פוליטית וחברתית, ותלוי בתקופה ותלוי בגוף, אז ניתנו פטורים. שגם כאשר הביולוגיה אומרת שהאדם הזה הוא יהודי, אז הצרכים הפרגמטיים יכולים לקבוע שהוא לא יהיה יהודי. והפטורים האלה ניתנו על ידי מי שהיו ברמות הגבוהות ביותר של הממשל, על ידי גבלס ועל ידי גרינג ועל ידי היטלר עצמו.
Hitler also turned the Muslim cleric and enthusiastic Nazi, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, into an Aryan.
השתמשו בו בתעמולה האנטי-בריטית שלהם, בשיחות השולחן של היטלר, שכמובן שאלו אותו, איך אתה עם כל התפיסות הגזעניות יכול לקבל כבעל ברית אדם כמו חאג' אמין אל-חוסייני, שהוא ערבי. והיטלר אומר, כשמסתכלים על חאג' אמין אל-חוסייני בפנים, רואים שיש לו עיניים כחולות. עכשיו, מאיפה יכול להיות לערבי עיניים כחולות? הוא בוודאי צאצא של הצלבנים.
Only about 2,000 exemptions were issued. Most Mischling didn't receive Aryanization certificates and returned to dangerous and complicated civilian life. In that life, Werner Goldberg had to save his Jewish father from the Gestapo 3 times.
2 SS people took my father on the Trage to the ambulance, war inzwischen an SS-Ambulance. So I like to visit my father. It's impossible. He is prisoner of the Gestapo.
On Christmas Eve, when all the guards were at a party, Goldberg rescued his father from the German hospital.
And so it was right. Nobody, also a sister only. And I thought, I take my father away. Is it possible? So you will see that. And I took him in a taxi and brought him at home.
The annihilation of millions of Jews during the Holocaust was without precedent in modern civilization. The Nazis claimed that the Jewish people were the root cause of all evil in the world and had to be destroyed. But the glaring question is, what did the Mischling know about the Holocaust? And when did they know it?
על המחנות, הוא לא יודע עד כמה שהוא ידע מהמחנות.
Also beim Kommiss war die Scheißhausparole sowieso, dass die Juden ins KZ kommen und umgebracht wurden. Das hat jeder so immer geflüstert. Und das konnte man nur mit engen Kameraden sich unterhalten, offen unterhalten. Und ich selbst auf dem Vormarsch im Nordabschnitt, also über Lettland, da haben wir bei Dynaburg gehört, wie immer mit Maschinengewehren geschossen wurde. Und da haben wir mal einen gefragt, das war auf dem Vormarsch. Und da haben wir einen gefragt, was da los ist. Und da hat er gesagt, ich weiß gar nicht mehr, ob das ein Soldat war oder einer von der wie heißt es, von der geheimen Stabspolizei. Der hat nur gesagt, ach, da werden Verbrecher hingerichtet. Und das war alles. Ja, die Soldaten, wir wussten sowieso, dass es da jüdische Häftlinge gab in Auschwitz oder Buchenwald. Aber das wurde alles immer so unter Kameraden erzählt, nicht öffentlich. Und wir hatten auch, ich muss sagen, wir hatten es auch dann verdrängt. Also jedenfalls ich habe es verdrängt. Ich habe gedacht, na, Gnade dir Gott, wenn sie dich erwischen. Nicht? Das war es noch.
Arno Spitz maintained that he never served in areas with a Jewish population.
During the war, I never was in areas where there was any Jewish population as in Poland. In this part of Russia, I was not in White Russia, I was south of Leningrad. In this part of Russia, in these swampy districts, there were no Jews. If I had heard about what was going on in concentration camps, I would probably have changed my mind about Germany, about German public, about the line of command, but I probably wouldn't have done anything. Tell me, what could I have done? Well, otherwise you are shot. The army couldn't have done anything. I tell you that much. If I had been put into a position where I had to mistreat miserable people, captive people, I wouldn't have done, and that's I'm sure about that. I wouldn't have done anything brutal. That I'm sure. I still believe, I believed and still believe that only a very small part of the German population had been involved in those crimes.
In 1943, the half-Jews were again called back into the service due to the German military's need for manpower. Hans-Gert Falkenberg was called back and sent to the organization Todt. Todt was a labor battalion made up of prisoners, Mischlings, and other undesirables. The workers were sent to build roads, work on the Atlantic Wall project, or build the deadly V-2 rockets.
And the V-2s were in a state where every fifth or sixth exploded while they were put together. And so that was more or less a certain death.
And while he was working in Organization Todt, Falkenberg received a letter from his Jewish grandmother who was then in a concentration camp. And Falkenberg couldn't do a thing to help her.
The last letters she wrote in French, cette semaine, encore une fois, 10,000 par gaz. This week, again, 10,000 by gas. In July 1942, this was unimaginable. You could only tell yourself, people are becoming crazy there. This cannot be the truth.
Falkenberg quickly realized that his grandmother's reports weren't so ridiculous and that his own life was in serious danger. He and some of his campmates planned an escape. One night during an air raid, they stole German uniforms and scaled the walls. They found their way to Paris, dressed as German officers.
So we lived in Paris as an OT officer in a hotel with all the privileges of the German officers, getting soap and liquor and I don't know what. So I played tennis under the Eiffelturm. I visited the opera. I visited the Camera Comique. And this is my Paris, you know. Dark, coming from the Trocadero, listening to Mengelberg's 8th Symphony of Beethoven, and then as a German officer, now perhaps being shot down by a resistance man. It was a very, very strange situation.
In Paris, Falkenberg met a girl at the movie theater. He discovered that she worked for the general in charge of army service. She forged papers for Falkenberg, releasing him from the organization Todt.
And I told her more or less who I was, that I had to get rid of this uniform as soon as possible. She went back to her general's office at 12 o'clock in the evening. She typed all the papers I needed to be dismissed from the Organisation Todt. And at the same time, I went to Berlin and got dismissed the next morning.
In April 1943, in celebration of Hitler's birthday, the Nazi leaders decided to give him a present and free Berlin of all Jews. At that time, several thousand Jews married to non-Jews were still in the city. Werner Goldberg's father was arrested yet again and taken to the Jewish Community Center on Rosenstrasse Avenue. Families of those arrested gathered in a park across the street, awaiting the fate of their relatives. This later was known as the first protest ever held against the Nazi regime.
In the morning, I stood there and there came an open car from the SS, and in the front, a school comrade of mine sat there. And I went through the police cordon and took them at arm. Gerhard, dich schickt mir der Himmel. Was ist los? What's the matter? My father is here. Oh, you have a luck. I am the chief here. I can't speak to you here. Here is my card. Call me in the evening. I can't leave here. You can leave. Call me in the evening. In the evening, I called him, and he told me in the telephone, father comes back at home. And in the next morning, he was here.
Freim Glaser wore the German uniform for 5 months before he managed to escape behind the Russian lines.
וככה עמדנו לבושים במדים, ואומר לי, אז היה שם איזה סרג'נט, ואומר לנו, עכשיו אני אלמד אתכם דבר חשוב, אצלנו שומרים על ניקיון, שומרים על משמעת, ואתם חייבים לברך. כל מי שאתם רואים צבא מהצבא הגרמני, אתם חייבים לברך אותו, והברכה היא, הייל היטלר. אתה צריך להרים את הידיים, והוא אומר לנו, תעשו, עכשיו אני רוצה לראות אתכם, איך אתם מברכים. אז עשינו ככה חזרה אחת, הייל היטלר, וככה מברכים אתכם. טוב, יצאנו לרחוב, באמת מצאנו כל מיני אנשים במדים גרמנים מסתובבים, ועד שהגעתי לאן שצריך להגיע, איפה שאנחנו, זה היה המקום, איפה שאנחנו הלכנו ללוד והחדר שלנו. אז הייתי צריך לברך את הייל היטלר, כל מי שפגשתי בדרך. אני הייתי בפחד מוות, אבל מה? אני הייתי בפחד מוות גם לפני זה. גם כשהייתי בתחת בזה, הפחד היה אצלי כבר ככה, ישב אצלי חזק.
The Allied invasion marked the beginning of the end of the Second World War. The Red Army attacked from the east. The forces surrounded Germany. The enemy encircled Arno Spitz from every side, blocking any chance of escape.
And they approached an American Jeep, and I jumped off the road and tried to hide myself, but there were not yet any leaves at the bushes. So they stopped right in front of me, pointed a machine gun at me, and the lieutenant asked me to come up and give him my side gun. He asked me to be seated behind him in his Jeep. The Jeep turned out. I tipped on his shoulder and said to him, "What are you going to do with me?" Well, he said, "We take you to camp, a prisoner's camp." And I said to him, "I tell you, I don't want to be a prisoner. I love my freedom just as much as you do. And my father is an American, Jewish American." This was the first time for my Jewish ancestry came into play. He told the driver, stop. He wanted to let me go. The driver did not obey.
Arno Spitz was captured, escaped, and was captured again.
And this was an American captain. And he said to me, well, why did you want to escape? I said, I don't want to be a captive. I cannot stand being captive. I'm completely free, just like my father, who is a citizen of the United States. Oh, he said, your father is, how can that come? I said, my father is Jewish and left Germany.
Helmut Kopp was captured by Soviet troops and taken to a prisoner of war camp. He was kept prisoner for nearly 2 years, from 1944 to 1946.
In der Gefangenschaft habe ich eine Ärztin, die war Jüdin. Und nun dachte ich habe gesagt, ich bin untergetaucht ich habe meine Papiere gefälscht, Und da wurde sie ganz böse. Und da hat sie gesagt, das kann nicht sein bei der deutschen Armee.
Juli 1944 in russischer Gefangenschaft, 2 Jahre. Und dann nach 2 Jahren kam ich zurück mit 44 Kilo. Ich wiege heute 84. Damals wog ich so 78. Und kam zurück und erst mal ein Vierteljahr gar nichts. Also weil ich wie ein Skelett aussah. Und da lebte ich bei Freunden. Nicht? Und mein Bekanntenkreis war jüdischer Bekanntenkreis, nicht? Also Mischehen, nicht? Aber da gab es keine, also am Anfang. Ach so, und dann hatte ich dann geheiratet. Ich hatte eine Freundin gehabt vor dem Krieg, eine Arierin. Aber wir durften ja nicht heiraten, wir durften nur also heimlich, nicht? Und dann haben wir geheiratet.
Of the 160,000 Jews living in Berlin in 1933, only 1,500 Jews, counting the Mischlinge, survived until the war's end. Except for Werner Goldberg's father, his Jewish family all perished in the Holocaust. After the war, Goldberg tried to help his neighbors as they entered a new period in Germany. He helped rebuild his Berlin neighborhood. He established a soup kitchen with food he scrounged from the Soviet army, and even started a fire department. Later, he became active in German politics and the struggle for democracy and minority rights. He became a member of the city council, started his own political party, and was one of the leaders in getting legislation passed granting reparations for Jews and others who'd suffered at Nazi hands. After the war, Arno Spitz joined his Jewish father in Los Angeles and became a successful building contractor. When the Berlin Wall went up dividing Germany in 1961, Spitz felt he needed to return to Germany. He supported the Social Democratic Party. Spitz opened a publishing company that aired pro-democratic views. Spitz lost most of his Jewish relatives in the Holocaust. All of Helmut Kopp's Jewish family were murdered by the Nazis, except those who had escaped to Israel. Kopp and his wife stayed in Berlin, where he worked mainly as a truck driver or chauffeur. After the war, Hans-Gert Falkenberg learned that he'd lost all of his Jewish relatives, including his grandmother. He finished his education, earning a PhD, and established Input, a foundation dedicated to democracy. Falkenberg was also a well-known German TV producer and television personality. Until his death in 2005, Falkenberg was married to his third wife, an American Jewish academic. They have a son who had celebrated a bar mitzvah. Until his death in 2004, Werner Goldberg worked to advance democracy in Germany. Given all that he accomplished, perhaps he really was the ideal German soldier after all.